Husker fans. Sam McKewon with the Sip and Sam Showdown. Sipple is on a bye week this week after Nebraska's 30-23 loss to Minnesota. I'm here. Sip will be back next week for a full bore Sip and Sam Showdown as we preview the Purdue game. And surprise, surprise, Purdue is ranked. I want to remind everybody to subscribe to HuskerExtra.com. We have a lot more features coming, especially as the season winds down. Remember that recruiting is part of what we do, and you're going to see a lot of recruiting coverage on HuskerExtra.com that you haven't seen yet because Nebraska's had kind of a quiet recruiting season, but you're going to see a bunch of it as we get up into the run-up of signing day. And, of course, it's been a little bit of a dramatic season, hasn't it? So there might be more coming as it relates to this Nebraska football program, and you're going to get exclusive commentary and content on HuskerExtra.com that you're not going to get anywhere else. So you're going to want to continue to subscribe there. Sip and I will be doing the showdown, and we're going to have a lot to talk about because I think this is going to be a really interesting final month of Nebraska football, given the fact that they've lost now 5 games. They're 3-5 going into a bye week. The bye week comes a little bit late, but they're 3-5 going into the bye week. They have Purdue, Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Iowa after the bye week. And in between Ohio State and Wisconsin, they have another bye week. So they're going to have a little bit of cushion here late in the season where they might be able to get a little bit healthier. But I think we're going to have a lot to do. So what we're going to do today is I asked for questions on Twitter, a mailbag, and I'm going to answer some of those questions. I may go off on a rant a few times. For people who read on HuskerExtra.com my Monday Rewind column, I think a lot of people probably did read it. I essentially think that Nebraska's offense needs kind of an overhaul. It's not that it's statistically horrible. If you look at the numbers, you're going to say, oh, I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, especially relative to the rest of the Big Ten. This is true, but this is Scott Frost's calling card offense. It's what they spend so much time on, and they cannot score in the clutch. It's just a problem for them. And so that's something that we'll be interested to maybe hear from Scott on Wednesday about that. I'll be curious to see if he has any more to say about where the offense is. But I'm going to take some questions. I have them right here in the helmet, right behind the helmet here. So I'm going to take some questions about that we received today and try to answer those for you. The first one is from Bill Ferris, and it says, what are your thoughts on this staff's roster management? High school recruiting has tapered off considerably. Are they planning on hitting the transfer portal especially hard, retaining juniors? When all of these super seniors graduate, is the roster going to be in trouble? Bill, you ask a really interesting question about which I have many, many thoughts. All right, so let's talk about this for a second. Let's just kind of break this down. Nebraska went into the season, the super seniors are going to be gone, right? And there's not that many of them. I think there's 6 or 7. But they had 17 juniors. Now, all of those juniors, because of NCAA rules related to COVID, get another year next year, right? So most of them are 5th-year juniors, not all of them, but most of them are 5th-year juniors. And they get another season next year. There's 17 of them. Out of that 17, I'm going to tell you about 15 of them are pretty high-level contributors. We're talking about Adrian Martinez, who's a 4th-year junior, Austin Allen, Cam Taylor-Britt, Damian Daniels, on and on and on. There's a couple guys that are probably going to move on because, hey, it's time. But most of those guys are probably guys that Nebraska would have liked to have had back. There's 2 complications to that. One, they didn't have a conversation with these juniors before the season as to whether they're going to come back or not, and that ultimately affects what happens in December, right? By the time the first signing date comes around in late December, that's when your players are making a decision about whether they're going to go to the NFL or not, or they're going to transfer, they're going to do whatever. And so Nebraska didn't have a conversation with the juniors before the season to see if they were going to stay or go. And it's my sense that if most of these juniors wanted to come back, even though the team's 3-5, even though they may not make a bowl, if most of these juniors wanted to come back, I think Nebraska would say, well, okay, you can come back. Adrian Martinez, Cam Taylor-Britt, Austin Allen, you want to come back? These are some of the best players on the team. Problem is, I'm not sure a lot of them are going to come back. I think about 5 of them have put themselves in position to go to the NFL. I mean, just straight up go. I think Martinez is there. He's put on film what he's going to put on film, people. Austin Allen is having one of the best seasons that Nebraska tight ends had since Matt Harrigan. Cam Taylor-Britt, it's probably time. He's a 4-year starter. He's not going to change his game a lot. He's probably going to go. Damian Daniels has had his best season by far. It wouldn't surprise me if he went. So on and so forth. And so what's going to happen at the end of the year is there's going to be these numbers out there, and it could be a lot of numbers, these juniors, who decide to either leave or they decide to graduate. A lot of them already have graduated, and they just go. The problem is that, as it stands right now, Nebraska has 8 commits after the decommit of Hayden Schwartz yesterday. They plan to sign a class of about 13 or 14. This isn't the best year to sign a small class because it's the same year that the NCAA is giving a special dispensation for 7 extra spots in your recruiting class if you have transfers leave. Nebraska's not getting in anywhere near 32 recruits in this class from high school recruits. Right now they're at 13. My suspicion is they're going to have, 20 scholarships available once everybody leaves. Now, you always assume attrition, right, in some of the younger classes because some of those guys leave. They just go because they want to transfer somewhere else. They see the writing on the wall with the depth chart. They weren't a fit for the program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to figure you're going to have about 20, maybe 22 spots. What's Nebraska going to do with those spots? Well, here's one problem. By the end of December, most of the guys that want to sign, the guys that you want to sign, they've already signed. So between late December and early February, you either got to go out and find some freshmen, some prospective high school guys who've decided, I don't want to sign, I'm not ready to sign, and go find, diamonds in the rough, the old Bo Pelini strategy, or you hit the transfer portal. You hit the transfer portal real hard. You try to hit seniors, graduate transfers, things like that. Okay, that's fine. But then you got to ask yourself a question. If this team doesn't turn it around, let's say they finish 5-7, let's say they stay home. How many guys are going to want to transfer to a program where it's pretty clear that if Scott Frost keeps his job, he's going to have to produce in year 5. So it's going to be really interesting to watch. I think the roster management up to this point has been pretty good. I think that their class was too big when they got here in 2018. They didn't know a lot of guys. They added a lot of guys. A lot of those guys left. They probably should have been more judicious and held some of those scholarships back. I think in 2019 and 2020, they did a relatively good job. We can argue that they didn't manage Luke McCaffrey and Wandale Robinson really well, but at the end of the day, sometimes guys leave. They leave. 2021, we'll see. I'll be curious to see. I think there was an issue in 2020 where they signed some guys late from Florida who didn't know that much about Nebraska, and they left Nebraska pretty quickly. I think the 2021 class, I think if you ask those coaches, they'd be like, this is the class that we know the best, and we think a lot of that class. That said, most of those guys have redshirted. They're almost all going to redshirt. Teddy Prohaska can't redshirt because he played 5 games, and I think Marcus Buford, who is a prep school kid, he didn't redshirt. There's a good chance that Marcus is one of the starters next year or very, very close to being a starter in that safety spot. So most of the guys redshirted. This is still a very young team with a group of juniors who I suspect is going to leave. And if they do, and if most of those guys do, you want to know what? This is going to be one of the youngest teams in the country next year, especially at quarterback. If Adrian Martinez decides to move on, and I think he probably is going, he could to the NFL. Logan Smothers is your quarterback, and he doesn't have a ton of experience, and the guy behind him, Harburg, isn't going to have any. So this is going to become a very young team very fast if a lot of those juniors leave. And it will be very interesting to see how Nebraska manages the roster from there. So, I don't know. I mean, you could give them, I honestly give them about a B in 2019 and 2020. But by not having those conversations before the season as to who is going to stay or go, Nebraska really can't fill those scholarships. They can't go out and get high school kids. What's more, a lot of their very top targets in the 2022 class decided to go somewhere else. So it was kind of a problem there. All right, so that's the first question. Next question from, let's see, Chris Livingston. Sean Wilson. If Frost was willing to change his offensive philosophy, could that save his job? Well, here's the thing. Scott Frost doesn't have to change his offensive philosophy that much because Scott Frost's offensive philosophy is flexible enough to account for a lot of different things. I mean, they can just do a lot of different things in this offense. I think where they have to get better is in situational offense, and they've got to get better at the basic handing the ball off to a running back and having him gain yards behind the offensive line. And the other thing they've got to do is when the quarterback drops back, there's a consistent protection, there's a consistent pocket, and we're hitting the throws in rhythm that are there to hit. And if you look back at the Minnesota game, you're going to see all those things weren't really in place. Nebraska struggled when Adrian Martinez dropped back. There were open guys that he didn't hit. There were times when he and the receivers were not on the same page. And when Nebraska just hands the ball off to a running back, it's always an iffy proposition. They might hit a play like they did with Ramir Johnson on that little pull where Matt Sichterman comes around and Travis Vokolek came around, and that was a nice little play. But too often, they just get 0, 1, or 2 yards. They don't have a consistent identity at running back. It's been kind of a revolving door. It looks like Ramir Johnson is the guy now, but he got hurt at Minnesota. And when he left the game, did you see how much of a change there was in that game? Based on Jaquez Yant and Sevion Morrison coming in, it was dramatic. And Ramir Johnson's only been the starter for 4 weeks. And so there's a concern there. I think where Frost has got to tighten things up is in cohesion with that staff. Everybody's got to be on the same page, and there's got to be a consistent process in terms of motivation and focus each week. I think there's been times when those receivers have been spot on, and I think there's been times when the running backs have been spot on, and then I think there's been times when they haven't been great. The position that has been consistently consistent all season long is Sean Beckton's tight ends, and I think he's done a really good job. And I think for the most part, Adrian Martinez has done a pretty good job, but there's still inconsistencies and frustrations in his game that were true in early 2019 and remain true today. He's not a great red zone passer. He's so-so on third down. Those are the realities that you deal with. He still lowers the arm slot at times and gets the ball batted down. Those are frustrations you have. And if Martinez is a little banged up, and Scott Frost said on his TV show Sunday night that he is, right? If you take away that run element from him and you just put him in a pocket, you see what you get. And it's not always what you're looking for. So that's probably the thing I would say about Scott Frost's offensive philosophy. Scott knows more football and has forgotten more football than I'll ever know. So it's not a question of the guy knowing what to do or the intellect or getting his mind around anything. We're not talking about Les Miles here. But what we are talking about is somebody who's got to find a way to get everybody on the same page with him, and so that there's a sync there. And I think, that can be kind of a trouble. Next question, and this will be our last one. Any examples, this is from Wade Holland, any examples of success with swapping out assistant coaches this far into a failing coaching tenure like this? We've seen changes before. Barney Cotton in 2003, Bo Pelini in 2003, Bob Diaco in 2017 with varying levels of success. But some of those were to revive previously successful coaching tenures. I think that's a pretty good question. First, Bob Diaco was a hire by Sean Eichhorst in 2017 because Mark Banker had run afoul of enough people and pissed off enough people around that program that Eichhorst thought he should go. I don't think Mark Banker should have been fired. Mark Banker doesn't think Mark Banker should have been fired, and I think Mike Riley would tell you, because he's told me this, that he felt like Sean acted out of fear there. And it just wasn't a good decision. He didn't really give Mike Riley the latitude to renew Mark Banker's contract. And so that was a mistake, I think, honestly, to have brought Diaco on. He was the most different coach you could imagine from Mark Banker, and it just didn't work. I think the players wanted it to work, but it didn't. Bo Pelini is a really good example, though. Bo Pelini was a good hire by Frank Solich. It frankly saved his tenure. The defense in 2001 and 2002 wasn't great. When it was coordinated by Craig Bull. Frank Solich fires Craig Bull, has to go out and look for a defensive coordinator, leans on his friend Monty Kiffin. Kiffin's advice is to go get this guy from the Green Bay Packers as a linebacker coach. And whatever you think of Bo Pelini as a head coach at Nebraska, nobody can deny that he was really, really good in 2003. He was a young guy who came here with, on fire. And he got his mitts into those players, and it worked. It was really, really successful. So I do think there are ways in which you can bring in an assistant every so often, and it just changes the conversation. Where did it change the conversation at Oklahoma? Well, for example, Bob Stoops fires Josh Heupel, who, by the way, is now the head coach at Tennessee. Fired him straight away. Good coach, fired him. Brought in Lincoln Riley, everything changed. So Josh Heupel wasn't doing a terrible job, right? Nothing that we would say was horrible. But when they bring in Lincoln Riley, everything changes. And not only that, Lincoln Riley becomes the head coach eventually. And it was a big, big change. Change number 2, Lincoln Riley fires Mike Stoops, which was kind of an institution at Oklahoma. His defense wasn't working anymore. It's probably not going to work. It wasn't working. The fans were openly booing Oklahoma's defense against Baylor one year. He fires Mike Stoops, or Mike Stoops resigned. It was like in the middle of the season. They bring in Alex Grinch from Washington State, who went to Ohio State. And now it looks a lot better. It's not always perfect. Obviously, Oklahoma still gives up points like they did to Texas and TCU. But you see the changes that can happen. There are times that you can bring in guys, even guys you don't know that well, and things can transform. Case in point, Tony Tuioti, the defensive line coach. I don't think Eric Chinander knew Tony Tuioti that well. He got a recommendation from a person that he trusted, brought Tuioti in, and I think Nebraska's defensive line is playing about as well as it's played in a really long time from a technique perspective. Those aren't the biggest and fastest and most talented guys up there, but Tuioti's done a really good job of rebuilding that culture and coaching those guys up. And those are the things that can happen when you take good recommendations and you put that coach in, and then there's a change. change. And I think Nebraska should have, if Scott Frost is still the head coach, and I expect him to be next year, they have to explore the possibility of changing that up. Remember, the offensive assistants who are with Frost right now have been with him for 6 years, with the exception of Matt Lubick, who's been with him for 2, and Frost and Lubick have known each other for 10, thereabouts. So this is a staff that's had a long time to be together. This isn't a let's see if there's an extra piece out there that they can get to. It's been a frustrating struggle in the red zone. It's been a frustrating struggle in the first quarter for some time. So I think Frost can feel the freedom to make changes there if he wants to. And I'll be curious to see if the athletic director, Trev Alberts, is like, you know what, might be time to bring in an outside voice. Can Frost handle that? I think he can. He hasn't done a lot of that. He hasn't gone outside his circle much. But I think the one time that they kind of went out and looked for the best coach for them, Tuioti, they got a pretty darn good coach. And so I think Nebraska's got to trust that they can still draw a bunch of people to this program. They pay really well. Even though they may not pay as much as Alabama and LSU, guess what? There's a lot of good coaches who don't work at Alabama and LSU. So I think that's something that Frost will have to consider in the offseason. And then, of course, there's always the question of recruiting. Do you have the best recruiting staff possible? To be honest with you, I think Scott Frost has recruited better than Mike Riley. Certainly better than Bo, I'll wait till January, Pelini. But do you have the best recruiting staff possible? That's a question that Frost is going to have to ask himself in the offseason. My sense is that, Trev Alberts wants to see this work. He wants to give Frost the support that maybe he didn't have in the first couple of years. And so the apparatus around Frost can improve and the discipline around him can improve, so on and so forth. And then you can see whether he will succeed or struggle based on what happens from there. So I still think this is an issue. This is a 2-year conversation. A lot of people are surprised maybe to hear that from me. Still think it's a 2-year conversation. We'll see. But I think they can make significant changes to the staff. It's always fun as a reporter having to figure out who they're going to hire. Yeah, calling people, going back channels, all that stuff. So I'm not necessarily looking forward to massive staff changes, but I think Nebraska may need it. We'll find out. Frost's going to talk tomorrow. We'll see if we'll see what he says. We'll see if he disagrees with any of the criticism that's been lobbed his way, and he'll probably give us an update too on Adrian Martinez and a few other players. All right, I'm Sam McKewon with the Sip and Sam Showdown. Sip will be back next week. We'll have a full showdown next week, and we'll have a lot to talk about too because Nebraska will not play a game this weekend, so we'll be able to talk Frost hot seat next Tuesday. Thanks, Husker fans.